Hi, and welcome to AI for UX. This is the space where UX researchers and product leaders stay current with AI innovations. I'm John Whalen, and I'm the founder of Brilliant Experience, and we're a psychology driven product innovation firm. I've struggled with keeping up with all the AI tools that are out there for UX research and discovery research, and I'm guessing I'm not alone. That's why we started this. In each installment, we speak to a founder of one of the latest AI enhanced research tools and learn a little bit about how it might benefit you and where the whole field is headed. Just as a quick note, these videos aren't product endorsements, and we pay full price for any technologies we use, and no one's getting paid. It's simply informational. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm very happy to introduce Alok, and Alok is the CEO of Reveal, and it's a tool that transcribes, translates, synthesizes user and market research questions, tests hypotheses, compares interviews, and more. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with us. We're delighted to have you.
Great to be here, John.
Cool. Well, let's dive into Reveal right away if we can. I just wondered, like, who do you feel is the target audience for Reveal, and kind of what sort of pain points does it address for folks?
Sure. I'll maybe start with an anecdote.
Of course.
So I'm an part programmer. I can do some programming, and when I use tools like ChatGPT to help me, I look at ChatGPT as like a senior engineer who knows a little bit more than me and can help me. And I have my co-founder who's amazing at engineering. He looks at ChatGPT as a junior engineer who can do things that he doesn't want to spend as much time towards. And I think there's a little bit of truth to that in terms of our field also, that a tool like Reveal can be used by people who are very experienced, where it can come in and help people do things that they don't want to spend time on, that they can focus more on their craft. And it can also help people who are sort of newer to the field and see how it works and then learn through that process, discover through that process. So with that context, it's really a breadth of people are using Reveal. People who are individual researchers, research agencies, product managers, and entrepreneurs who are sort of in the early stage doing customer discovery.
Yeah, very nice. So it is a wide range. And so, what would be a typical scenario when a UX researcher or one of the members of the product team might use Reveal?
Right. The most common scenario is when you're running a qualitative research study. So you've done some user interviews or you've done some focus groups and you're working to synthesize that data. That's where you can come in and to Reveal, add those interviews, upload the transcript or upload the audio video file. And then through that process, you can then get a transcribed view of it and start to ask research questions. And Reveal helps with that. So a typical study of 8 to 10 interviews is what we see most commonly. But as people are using it, I'm also seeing that study getting expanded, where people looking at some of the past interviews that are, were done before but are not getting utilized as much to start to get a little more of a longitudinal view.
Interesting. Uh, yeah, I guess I've seen a full gamut of folks trying to get all their historical data put into a tool, and also just having sort of sometimes really large scale qualitative studies. So, there are some folks that we've interviewed so far, sort of in your space of collecting the data and helping you to analyze or synthesize it. So maybe you can just tell me, what's sort of your focus, or the ways that you're trying to make your product really unique.
Sure. AI is naturally a very powerful technology, and a lot of people are using it. For us, it breaks down into a few different areas. So first is really the quality of the input itself, and how do we send AI the right kind of input? And for that, the way we do it is we don't just use transcriptions as it is. Once you upload your audio video file, we actually ask you who the participants are. If it is a focus group, there could be multiple, and if it's an idea, it'll be a single person. Based on that, Reveal understands whose words to focus on and whose words to use as context. Based on that, then the second thing we do is we extract conversations out of it. So we're like trying to look into it and say, what are people really talking about? And that forms a strong foundation for AI to then analyze. So that becomes layer number one. The second layer comes in is once you get the response back from AI, how do you actually trust it? How do you review it? And that's where there is always a tie back into the transcript to be able to see, okay, yes, this is why AI thinks the response to be so. And then the third layer is really around once you have that core analysis done, how can I then take it to the next levels? How can I compare these interviews and say, okay, what is common between them? What is different between them? Or one of the things that we are working on is really persona extraction. How can I take that information and then extract out cohorts out of it? So
Hmm.
this kind of a layered analysis to be able to go deeper is the third key thing.
Huh. And yeah, we definitely don't want you to reveal your technical secrets, but it's really interesting to hear how you try to approach this, and I'm sure it's rapidly evolving. Well, I guess I also just sort of pragmatically, if I'm using Reveal, how should I think about working with a tool like yours, and how might it work differently from how I used to work before I didn't have a tool like this?
Sure. I think there are two parts to that answer. One is an extension of what I do today, and the second is further down the line, how things could change. Uh, so right now, you'll be able to come in and add your interviews into Reveal, and the key thing is really around speed, and that's true with any AI tool. You plug in a question, and AI is able to come back with a response very quickly. But what that enables is that because you're getting the response so quickly, it allows you to think further and go deeper. So AI comes back with a response and it's like, okay, that's interesting. What about that? And you can plug in that question and get a response back quickly. So I think it changes in the way we interact with the interview data
Mm-hmm.
itself. Uh, it allows us to both go deeper as well as
Mm-hmm.
explore multiple perspectives. So that's really interesting. The second part of it is as you get comfortable with the idea of where AI can play a role in your process, then you start to expect more. You're like, okay, why can't it do this a little bit further? That's where some of those layered analyses start to come in. Okay, if I can say, okay, what did the men say versus what did the women say? I can identify these, I can tag these interviews and then compare those cohorts, things like that. You start to have a more of a conversation with your data in that sense. And as you're exploring different hypotheses in your mind, you're just able to plug those in and get a response back.
Mm-hmm. That is really different, and I guess I hear people talking about interrogating their data and asking questions of the data and trying to find it. So just some people worry about bias or hallucinations. I'm anticipating, but just wanted to hear from you. So you're drawing basically it. Sometimes there can be kind of a closed system, so you're drawing from the data, and then it's. I'm guessing you're sort of like sharing quotes or things like that that would be related to an answer.
Yes, yeah, that's true. So it is a closed system. It is only looking at the data that
Mm-hmm.
has been provided. And then you're right. We also tie it back to the actual utterances that support whatever response AI provides. I do find that in cases where their questions are very broad, if I
Mm-hmm.
just put a one word question there, or if the actual content of the interview does not really talk so much about that topic and you ask AI about it, it does still try to be helpful and try to answer. And that's where you might run into hallucinations, an issue. But other than that, in the core analysis that we do, we don't see any of those issues.
I did want to ask you one thing that's sort of unique about your work and your design is this notion of similarities or differences amongst different folks, and ultimately how logically that could follow to cohorts. How do you try to like? What sort of things are you using to try to detect these similarities? I mean, I can imagine how a human does it, and I was just wondering how you approached it from an algorithmic perspective.
Yeah, so that was actually one of the very exciting pieces that we were able to build and reveal. So everything that we do is within the context of the research questions that are being asked. So when you go to reveal, in addition to adding your interviews, you also specify the research questions. And reveal is also able to suggest some of the emerging themes, so it helps you in that regard too. Now, for each of those research questions, that's when we compare all the interview analysis and say what is similar between them and what is different between them. And we really use using AI for that also. And based on that, it is able to come back and give you specifically that participant one and participant two said this, while participant three said something else. The one thing I found interesting in the contradiction side, especially, is it is able to bring out both the kinds of things where there was actual contradiction, where the participants said things that were almost opposite of each other.
Mm, mhm.
But it is also able to detect when a couple of participants said something, but the other participant did not really talk much about it. They might have hinted towards it. So it's able to bring some of those long tail elements into the analysis also.
Interesting. And I'm imagining. So I have a little bit of like what, not real PTSD, but I remember thinking of how hard it was when we had 30 interviews and they were like, which one talked about this, can you find that quote? And that's when I love the AI to be able to like ask about that and have it, and it may well be that there were two and I only remembered one. So no, that's a huge benefit. Well, you mentioned how folks might use this. Maybe you could just frame a scenario, and we could actually look at using your tool a little bit with you. So I could work on sharing your screen, and maybe we could just talk through that possibility. So here, let me go ahead
That's all.
and see if we can do this. Great. So I'm seeing your reveal studies right now with the HR priorities.
Wonderful. So this is what really looks like once you log in. And HR priorities, GOP debate, employee benefit study, these are all individual studies that have been conducted. And each of the cards, as you can already tell, are individual interviews that have been conducted. It could be a focus group or an individual interview. And you can have multiple. So, like in this case, I think we have about 13 different interviews that were conducted. You typically start with creating a new study, just to give you that background, give it a name. And this is where you can provide the initial set of research questions that you start with. You can always change them later on. And similarly, you can also set up hypotheses if you have those. With that, you just create a study. Then you're able to go in and add an interview. For the interview, you can upload the file in any of these common formats. You can enter a Zoom URL, or you can paste a transcript. And if you're uploading a video or audio file, you can also ask it to redact the PHI or PII.
Luke, just
But
a
once
brief.
the interview is,
Oh, I'm so sorry. A
Mhm.
brief question right at the start. So you were framing the hypotheses you had and kind of what the groups are like. Is this the kind of thing where I might actually need to give this a fairly what level of depth, I guess, have you found is most valuable here? So in some products, you actually have to go into some detail to create these sort of stories for the AI, and others are just like, just ask me a question and we're going. What have you found is most successful with your tool?
yeah, the latter works very well in this case. So the example here is the interviewee is aware of certain things, or interviewee is having problem doing something. So as long as you frame it as a question like that, and you mention the word interviewee, that's actually uh, all that AI needs to be able to analyze it.
Great. Well, here, I'll let you continue your story. Thank you. This is great.
And just building on that point, in terms of research questions, also, you can keep them very broad. Like you could say, help me identify the needs and pain points, just as those words. Or you can have it a little more verbose and say, okay, I'm interested in learning about this particular part of the process. Or how did the interviewee become aware of their need in this space, things like that. So with that, let's go into an actual study. So if we were to look at an example of the HR priority study, this is what it looks like. I'm going to scroll past just to walk you through a little bit, and then we come back to this. What you're seeing is these are the individual interviews that were conducted. Each of the columns represent that. And then each of the rows represent the research question that was set up. So this is about HR priorities. We were talking about current business priorities. We were talking about the vendor selection process and so on. Once you have uploaded the interview, it basically shows up like this. It'll process it and it'll say, help me select the interviewee here. When you click that, you would be able to access the whole transcript and the audio video file, and you'll be able to identify who the interviewee is in this process. Or they could be multiple if it is a focus group. You simply check that, give them an avatar, like you can tag them here. So this is where I could say this is, let's say, female, and this is male, so on. And then with that, you just update the interview. Once that is done, that's when it automatically starts to analyze, and you would see responses like these coming against each of your research questions. So now it's looking at what are the current business priority for this person, looks at the interview and comes back with this summary. In addition to summary, it is on top showing you the timeline of the transcript. So here you can, at a snapshot, see where in the interview was this being discussed. So you can see there was a lot of concentration towards the end of the interview in this. In this case, there was only one point where this was being discussed. And you can access that and see the actual utterance right here. If you wanted to go into the transcript, you could also just click View Related Transcript. And on the panel on the right side, you'll be able to get to that filtered view. This was the actual utterance that led AI to believe this is the response. You can play it from this point onwards. And of course, you can access the full transcript as well.
So Alok,
As
I'm so sorry. Quick question. So if basically if there were, I guess actually, yeah, what we're seeing in the first person, James, is that there were some times when they discussed business priorities right at the start of the interview and right near the end as well. So it basically brings it all together for you. Nice.
That's correct. That's
Very
correct.
cool.
And then this is AI. So AI should really be seen as the first draft that it's presenting to you. But as a researcher, the judgment is really in your hands. So if there is anything that you disagree with, you can always edit what has come back and enter your own. You can remove what's being said, you can add your own points. So you do have full control over that part.
Interesting.
Now, once you have all of these interviews analyzed, then you can say, hey, run a study level analysis. And this is where it starts to compare each of these interviewees for each of the research topics. And this is where you will see the similarities and the contradictions come back. So here we can see Maria, Michael, Ken, Laura, all of them agreed on the importance of employee retention. Uh, and over here, James and Brenda discuss the need for a performance management process, while these three interviewees did not really mention that as a priority. And all of that typically takes a few seconds for this response to come back. So it's really fun and interesting to work with.
Look, a real quick question. So, are you anticipating that these sort of summaries are perfect for, say, a dedicated UX researcher, or are these designed for the entire team to check out, or even for sort of democratize the research? What's your intent here?
Uh, the intent is really for it to be an input into that decision-making process.
Mhm.
I do think that there is a lot of information being shared with an individual through this process, and there need to be better ways to communicate that. So one of the things that we are working on is how can we better visualize this information to make it easier for people to process it. So yeah, so short answer is I think it is intended to be towards teams.
Mhm.
But I think we need to do a better job of presenting this information for the team to be able to use this and make decisions. In addition to the research questions that I had asked, uh, the AI has obviously looked at each of these interviews. So it also identifies other emerging themes. So here I can see there are 9 additional topics found. If I was to click that, here is a list of the additional topics that AI found looking at these interviews. So there was conversation about compensation and benefit, employee engagement, retention, HR community and benchmarking, things like that. And if I like any of these, I can just simply click. They get added into my research questions. I can simply update my study. And now AI will automatically run the analysis for it. And we should see the response coming back in a few seconds.
Look, a quick question. Uh, I actually feel like I doubt you can kind of answer this. Maybe you can answer this for yourself, but I feel like in some cases it takes a fair while for processing to happen, and you found a way to make this happen very quickly. And I just didn't know if, I don't know, is there something you might be doing differently, or I mean, it's great that it has this strong response time. It just is a little bit unusual currently.
Yeah, I think part of it goes back to how we structure the input that goes into the AI itself. So one thing I did not show you is when I go into the view transcript mode, over here, I have conversation summaries. So what I've done is for an individual interview, I'm looking at the actual transcript over here. And in addition to it, I have these conversation summaries. This is where it has looked at the transcript and extracted out individual conversations that were a part of it. And those are what are summarized here. You can still see the timestamp, you can see who spoke about it. So it's still tied back to the actual transcript, but it's summarized. You can also see the individual topics covered in this part of the summary. So by creating this kind of a core knowledge base from the transcript, it helps speed up the whole process for AI to analyze anything further down the line. The speed is exactly where, like I was mentioning before, so like we had just entered this HR community and benchmarking, and within a few seconds we had response for all of these interviewees, in this case five, but I've done this with over 30 interviews also, and it works really well. And this is where it allows me as a researcher to say, oh, that's interesting. Let me dive deeper into it. And you can keep interrogating the data, like you mentioned, and get deeper into the analysis.
Um,
Uh, there's one more thing I wanted to share with. Sorry, go ahead.
oh no, no, please go ahead, and I'll hold my question till the end. Go right ahead. Thank you, Alok.
No, okay. Uh, so one of the things that you would notice is that under each of the names we have the tags, so like male or female, and you can have multiple tags. So this is a capability that we recently added. You can also now run comparison reports based on these tags. So if you wanted to say what did the men say
Hmm.
versus what women said, you can simply select those tags, give it a label, and then Review will go and first summarize what the women said, what men said, and then compare those cohorts to do similar, what is similar between them and what is different between them. Let me see. This will take a few seconds, but let me see if I have an example of this. Actually,
I,
I'll come back to that. Sorry.
yeah, well, I was
Go
going
ahead.
to ask you how your in real life you've found your users have been using that sort of comparison. I can imagine, for example, we've done stuff with information retrieval with experts, and the people who have 30 years experience approach it very differently than the people with 5 years experience, for example. But I just wondered if there were some that come to mind of representative examples of these comparisons.
So far what we've seen is things like these, where women demographic attributes based comparisons.
Hmm.
Uh, And this is also a very new, we've just launched this feature a week back.
Oh,
So
cool.
we are still collecting information on how people would use it.
Very nice. And in general, if I want to ask a question of this study, um, is that what you showed us before? Is there any different way that I might ask that? So if um, sorry, I was trying to think of a question in HR, but I wondered if you were just asking, like, yeah, how many people did find the retention policy to be satisfactory? How do you go about asking those kind of questions? I guess in a study, and is it possible to do it like across studies?
Yeah, that's a great point. So it will work exactly the same. So right now we are on the observations tab. Asking questions is really the same as what we put in the study as a research question. But to separate out the ones which are more exploratory questions versus the ones where okay, these are my research questions that I truly care about, we do have a separation. So under individual analysis, if I was to go to questions, this is where I can just plug in any question that I like. So I
Mm.
can say, what did the interviewee feel about the speed of vendor, or maybe feel about the business priorities. And you can just plug it in, and it works exactly the same way. So you have a row,
Hmm.
and then against each of the interviews, it starts to now analyze it. You can see the responses already popping in.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of fun to watch them live. Actually, it's interesting. Very cool.
Yeah, much. Cool. And then to your question about across the studies, so we are working on a search capability. Right now, it's very basic, but it will allow you to be able to search across different studies. And then the comparison report is also something that we're looking at instead of living only within a study. You could compare if you've done a study with a similar space over a period of time, you would be able to say, okay, I want to see what the men said versus what women said across these five different studies on these very topics. So those two things are in the works.
Very cool. And I know that some of our sort of institutional folks that we work with are always interested in, is this compliant for my security, or can I have multiple people sign in and things like that. These are so hard to answer for small companies, but I just wondered kind of what stage are you at in that
Sure.
process?
Uh, yeah, that's a great question. So both data privacy and data security are obviously very critical. From a data security standpoint, we are using the well-recognized infrastructure, so Amazon and Microsoft servers. That's where the information lives. We also are signing up BAAs, so business associates agreements with those companies to ensure that any kind of data privacy related actions are taken into account. So any company, any vendor that we're using, data privacy is sort of top of the mind for us to ensure that we understand how the data is being used, and we actually ensure that the data is not being used for any kind of training of the models, etc. And then beyond that, from an account standpoint, yes, you have an account with Reveal, and only you would have access to the data that you have uploaded.
Yeah. And just to bring us back to your scenario, I guess the last question I had was just how have you been seeing folks, or how have they been describing working differently as a result of having your tool from before they had such a thing?
Yeah, that's a great question too. What I found is that this kind of a grid approach has resonated very well with people. So when they see it, that immediately clicks and people find it useful.
Mm-hmm.
Where there are two areas where it takes time for people to get comfortable. One is trusting AI. Is it really
Mm-hmm.
giving me the right answer? Is it comprehensive? Am I missing on something? Things like that. And that partly is about experience, using it, feeling comfortable. And then after a couple of studies, I find that people are feeling pretty comfortable using it. The second is around how should I ask these questions? What if I put a one-word question? What if I put a whole sentence similar to what you were asking before?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's been a little bit of a trial and error for people. Not so much error, but you quickly see if you ask the question in a certain way, how does AI respond? So there is a little bit of that trial period where people are trying this out and seeing what kind of responses they get. And then as they go through that process, it becomes more clear.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Is there anything else you wanted to show us about Reveal before I ask you a little bit about yourself and the inspiration for this?
Oh, no, I think we covered the core
Good.
of it. Yeah.
Well, cool. It's actually been really interesting to ask folks. Just you went from being someone who might be doing some of this research yourself to being a product owner and going to that. So just I guess I was just really interested in the inspiration for doing this and how it's been and what have been some of the real achievements you've gotten. Clearly, you've got this great working product, but maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how you got started in this and wanted to do it.
Sure. Yeah. It really just started as an exploration. So I was lucky that a few years back, I worked in an organization where we worked on machine learning models quite a bit. So this is pre-LLM days. We were working on some of the hardest problem in healthcare, and I got to collaborate with data scientists. And that gave me a view into how does the core technology itself work. So when the LLM started to mature, it was a very natural click to say this should be able to help with the qualitative research. And naturally, like you and I and many of us in the field have done, we have spent hours listening to interviews, creating sticky notes, clustering
Mm-hmm.
them. So I've gone through the same experiences. And so it just started to naturally come together. And I was curious at first to see
Hmm.
whether it can deliver meaningful answers or not. And then as I started applying it, my initial intent was really just to provide raw materials to researchers. And I started talking to researchers, and they were like, "Can it do this a little more? Can it go a little further?" And that's what has led to where Reveal is today. So yeah, so really just started as an exploration, and through that process, we saw there is value, and we identified where it can contribute.
Uh, And just, you've come from no product to a really sophisticated one. Is there anything in particular that you're really achievement or milestone that you're really proud of about Reveal?
A number of different parts of it, absolutely. The first of it was really trying to find the right way to share this information with people.
Hmm.
If I was to show you the first design for Reveal, you'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. So going through that process of working with other researchers and figuring out in what format does this make sense. So just on the design side, I think there's been really valuable discovery. On the technology side, some of these things, like for instance, that comparison report, that was really tough to get right. So that took a lot of iterations because we wanted to make sure it's not just presenting some analysis, it is presenting something meaningful. So that was something that took a little bit of an effort, and I feel pretty good of where we are. The one more thing that we are working on, which I'm not able to show right now, is really the personas. You alluded to that in your previous comment. They, as you do the comparisons, you're already starting to cluster people to say these people think similarly, these people think different from each other. And what we've been working on is to take that information
Mm-hmm.
and translate that into persona or set of personas. And that was really good just to see it evolving, see it come to surface
Hmm.
and delivering something useful. Those are
Cool.
just some examples.
And well, this is a great segue to my next thing, just thinking about the future. So I guess I was interested in knowing, and I don't want to reveal your big secrets, but where you see your product evolving over the next little while, and also just how you see this whole product discovery, UX research, you know, evolve, and where do you see it going? So I'll let you answer.
So, yeah, a part of me is like, I don't know, but at
Right.
least some hypotheses I have
Sure.
are really, from a product perspective, the core element of Reveal sits on top of getting the right transcriptions and understanding that transcript. And that's something that we are constantly evolving. So that's a foundational piece that we'll keep working on to make transcriptions more accurate for us to be able to then extract out the right meaning from those. From a feature standpoint, I touch upon a couple of these things, but like persona kind of layered analysis that, okay, we have this summarization in place now. What can we do with that information? Because at a fundamental level, what we are doing is we are taking qualitative data and we are, for the lack of a better word, extracting some quantifiable elements out of it, or at least more
Mm-hmm.
structured elements out of it.
Yeah.
Um, so then we can start to package them and do new things like the persona. So there are other ideas that we're working on that side. How we communicate this information, visualization, that's important. And then from a broader arc of technology, multimodal is one thing that's obviously shaping up pretty well. OpenAI included vision into their recent models. So right now, Reveal is only looking at the audio and the transcript, but can also then start to look at the visuals, whether it's interface in the video recording or it's a person's expressions and how it can weave that in. I think some of those things are very useful. And then to your last question, in terms of our field itself, to me, really, it's the idea that we can focus deeper on our craft.
Mm-hmm.
That some of the things that we spend on spend time on today that we no longer have to, and we can do these things where we can just plug in a question in a few seconds, get the response,
Mm-hmm.
and work with that. I think it allows us to go deeper in our own craft, and that's something I'm very excited about.
Nice. Well, one thing that's been a real pleasure of doing these interviews is the thoughtfulness of the folks that I've been meeting with, and you're no exception. Very cool. If people wanted to give Reveal a try, can you just remind us how they should get started?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there is a free trial available. You can upload up to 4 interviews. That'll give you the full breadth of analysis that you can see it in action. But yeah, just go to doreveal.com and you can sign up right there.
Very cool. Well, really, I think that's all I wanted to do for today. We're out of time, but thank you so much, Alok, for sharing Reveal with us. And I'll just sign us off. So thank you again.
Cool.
So
My pleasure, John.
of course. So well, that's all for today, and thank you for tuning in and keeping up with the latest on AI for UX research. And subscribe if you enjoyed, and give us comments about what else you'd like us to feature next. And wishing you all brilliant insights with AI.